Hi everyone, I am here with a story from our Miracles Do Happen book. These are true stories that people send in of things that have happened in their lives. This one is called An Easter Miracle. This time of year we should be reading about a Christmas one, shouldn't we? But I'm going in order here, and this one's An Easter Miracle, and it is by Diane M. Comp. The young couple watched as I examined their 3-month-old baby at Yale New Haven Hospital, where I specialize in pediatric hematology-oncology. That's blood and cancer. It was difficult to answer the question in the eyes of Susan and Barry Crum, for I knew the statistics that said their tiny Catherine was destined to die. Susan and Barry had already grieved over one lost child, who died in infancy. Now their new baby suffered from the same disease, FEL, a genetic form of histosis, in which a type of bone marrow cell abnormally and destroys vital blood elements. Only one of every million babies is born with it. As a physician, I could not give the Crumbs high hopes. To save this child, I knew we would need a miracle. Children like Catherine had led me into pediatrics. I became deeply involved with my patients, even making a lace-trimmed nightgown for one baby whose mother never visited. It's so sad. But time after time I was taught by the young charges. In endeavoring to help one boy facing a rug test, I suggested he envision Jesus in the room with him. Think about Jesus, I said. I ain't never seen no doctors that would do that around these days. No. I want you to imagine that Jesus is hugging you tightly. He looked up at me as if I were a little odd and said, "But Jesus is already here." He knew the truth better than I. The test went smoothly, but Catherine was facing something far more perilous. There was one chance to save her life, but it was slim: finding a donor for a bone marrow transplant. As a stopgap, we put her on chemotherapy. Catherine rallied under the treatment. At all of us, with her delightful toothless smile, I asked fellow doctors and nurses to write notes in the Book of Hope. I kept outside her door. As the staff struggled to record positive words, I saw a subtle, even hopeful, progression in their rotations on their medical chart. Together we joined in a daring hope that she might survive. She became an outpatient, coming in for 3 days of chemo every 3 weeks. The odds we faced were formidable. First, we had to find the right donor. So far, the only successful transplants in babies this young were the results of a brother or sister donor. But Catherine had no siblings, that were alive anyways. Hers would be the first unrelated transplantation in our hospital. Finding a match in time would be a major miracle. 6 genetic elements must be exactly the same. No child had yet survived a partial match. If we found a suitable donor, we would then face the most excruciating risk of all. For 7 days preceding the transplant, Catherine would have to be given doses of chemotherapy strong enough to destroy her own bone marrow, making way for the new cells. If after we started this chemo, the donor changed his or her mind on the arrival of the donated marrow was delayed, Catherine would die. It was like shooting an arrow in her heart, trusting that it would be blocked at the last moment. It demanded an incredible step of faith. "We see no other way," Susan said. Lifting her chin, she added, "Barry, and I know the odds. We prayed for our child even before she was born. We trust the Lord." She picked up her daughter, who nestled her head on her mother's shoulder. "She'll be in God's hands one way or the other." We launched our search for a donor. I thank God for the time-loving people all over the world who have registered as bone marrow donors. They include doctors, secretaries, nurses, laborers, teachers, stay-at-home moms. We filed our request through an international registry of donors. In the meantime, Catherine continued coming in for treatment. 1 month passed, 2, 4, 6 months. Catherine seemed to be hanging in there, but after a year, I began to worry. Catherine's blood was showing a rise in abnormal cells. As I bent to examine her, she waved a pudgy hand and blessed me with her trusting smile. Then came the call we had waited for. Christine Radcliffe, a 29-year-old mother of 3 who lived in England, had registered as a potential donor. Her bone marrow was a perfect match. A date was set for its harvesting in a London hospital, timed to coincide with the schedule of a British Airways jet. One of our nurses, Han Peterson, would fly to London, pick up the marrow, and return the same day. Though there would be no turning back once the lethal chemotherapy was started, Susan and Barry were resolute. We didn't come this far to falter now, they said. So 7 days before the marrow was to be harvested, Catherine began receiving the chemo. Poor little tyke. Now defenseless against common germs, she was isolated in a protective plastic life island. Her mother donned surgical guard to hold her. Catherine's mouth developed ulcers. She whimpered in her sleep, and I wanted to take her pain away. Each terrible day lumbered by like a slow tick of an old clock. By now, Catherine was almost 17 months old and had already survived much longer than expected. On March 9, 1992, Christine Radcliffe entered the London hospital, where doctors aspirated the life-giving marrow from her hip bone. In America, we received the news. The harvesting had taken place. Han had boarded the plane at Heathrow and was on their way home. The media headlined the dramatic news. History is being made today at Yale New Haven Hospital. We all kept up our prayers. So did Susan and Barry's church congregation, as well as the prayer chains around the country that had joined in. At 6 o'clock that evening, we stood with TV news crews at the helipad of Yale New Haven Hospital, eagerly awaiting the helicopter that would bring Han and her priceless harvest from JFK International Airport. Finally, over glimmering Long Island Sound, a small speck appeared in the sunset. Then came the approaching chomp-chomp of the rotor blades. The helicopter settled on the landing pad before us, and Han jubilantly stepped out carrying the precious marrow. It was rushed to the bone marrow transplant unit. Suspended above Catherine, in the clear plastic pouch, the bone marrow looked like dark red blood. With some of it was. Her parents stood there quite with awe. The tubes were connected, and like a blood transfusion, the infusion began. As the marrow entered the baby's veins, we knew that the life-giving cells would find their way into the baby's own marrow, in a way we have yet to fully understand. I thought of the psalmist's song, "I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are thy words." Psalm 139:14. It was over in a few hours. Now came an anxious time of waiting to see if those new marrow cells would start making new ones. Catherine's mother and father were by her side practically every waking moment. Catherine's mother and father were by her side every waking moment. Blood sample after sample was tested. Poor little baby. Hallelujah! On the first day of spring, March 20th, Catherine's blood counts indicated new life. The gracious gift had been accepted in record time. Now the little girl could defend herself against infection. The Tuesday after Easter, Susan Crum entered her daughter's life island for the first time without mask, gloves, or gown. Catherine stood up, the little baby stood up, and clapped her hands with glee. Her mother dressed her in a flowered Easter frock, white bonnet and gloves, slippers, and a collared-coordinated pacifier. The baby paused before a mirror to admire herself, then holding her parents' hands, walked out the door. As I watched her toddle down the hall, I remembered how her innocent faith had never wavered. Again, I was reminded that it is not we grown-ups who lead the children home, but these little ones who lead us instead. The baby was saved.